My guest is Joel Richardson. Joel Richardson will be with us this entire broadcast. This is a very special edition today of Freedom Friday. And Joel is a New York Times bestselling author, Islamic Antichrist, Mideast Beast. He's written a book called When a Jew Rules the World. We're going to talk about all of this stuff and all of these books and the theological and eschatological meat of them all and how it applies to the world we're living in now. He's also a movie producer and a missionary and Middle Eastern expert. Joel, thanks for committing to being with us for the entirety of this show today.
Oh, as always, it's great to be with you. Thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, me as well. And it is cool to hear from these guys over in Israel. Guys, I use that term generically. These folks in Israel, and I'm guessing it's probably midnight there. So I'm really honored every time we hear those folks listening in live. So Joel, let's get back to this. Let's talk about the and you really are an expert on this, and again, I know you're humble about this. You probably wouldn't call yourself an expert, but you are. I mean, you've been writing about this for years. New York Times bestselling author in this, been in the heart of it, produced movies about it, producing more movies about it. You've been all over national and international television and radio for years, and you've been seen by millions around the world speaking on this, preaching on it. I was in a session with you at the Jim Baker Expo, and you stood there for an hour and preached before an audience of on the internet to the live stream to several 100,000 that clicked in and listened to you preach. So you are an expert in this stuff, and so tell us, what are your ideas? What's your understanding, according to the work that you've done and the research you've done, on the philosophy of Islam and end times? Because that just dovetails right into everything that's unfolding in the world right now. What do Muslims, and I know there's a real radical part of Islam as well, but just in general, what do Muslims believe about the Bible and Jesus and end times and the Antichrist and Israel and Jerusalem and who owns it and all that? Just, I'm going to hush and let you teach and explain to our audience these very important things for us to understand.
Sure. Well, the place that I think is a good place to start is with, in order to understand Islam, we have to understand where the Christian church went. And what I mean by that is that, and really I'm setting up for some later discussion, but really early on, the church, we call it the church, it was really a sect of Judaism that were following after Yeshua, the Messiah.
That's right.
But unfortunately, very early on, many of the Gentiles, in this community, they really fell into arrogance, and they began holding to a theology that we now call replacement theology, and it's a corruption of the original apostolic doctrine that was taught by Christ and his followers.
Yes.
But so really throughout church history, you had this idea that the church had replaced Israel, that they were sort of the new Israel. Well, again, it's thoroughly unbiblical. But so what we need to understand is that when in the 7th century Muhammad came along in Arabia, the Christians that he encountered were Christians that held to replacement theology. They were Christians that had bad theology. And so he basically looked at the Christians and he said, well, you guys say that you replaced the Jews. And we have to understand, Muhammad was delusional, he was self-deceived, but he was a cult leader.
Yeah.
Whether or not he believed he was a prophet or not, he was a fledgling cult leader. So he looked at the Christians, he said, you guys say you replaced the Jews, and then he said, well, I replace you and the Jews.
Right.
He said, I am the final messenger of God.
Right.
Yeah, so essentially what we have in Islam is really, I call it a hybridized strain, a mutated version of the bad theology that the Christians had. And so now, not only does Islam espouse replacement theology or supersessionism, but Islam added to that the sword. They added to it the extremely militant aspect of it. And in fact, Christians have most certainly used the sword to further their beliefs throughout history. But Islam actually has it canonized as part of their religion. The founder of their religion actually commands them to use the sword and modeled that themselves. So certainly Christians have picked up the sword and tried to spread Christianity, but they've done that against the model that Jesus left behind. Jesus said we are to lay down our lives for our enemies because that is how God behaved toward us. He laid down his life. He sent forth his very essence into the earth to lay down his life for us. We're called to do that same thing for our enemies. Pray for your enemies. Love those that persecute you. Well, Muhammad is nothing like this.
Right.
So you take the supersessionism, you add to it the militantism, the active militant aspect, and then you throw on top of that the end-time apocalyptic prophecies. And what you have are, and again, you can get into debating where did the prophecies of Islam come from, because demonstrably many of them came from Gnostic Christian scriptures, and they were versions of Christian and Jewish apocalyptic texts. But the Muslims at this point in time believe it is their divine destiny to take over the world, to wipe out Judaism, to wipe out Christianity. They believe that God is leading them in doing this. And this is something the world has never dealt with. We have never seen this culmination, this mutated virus that we have in the religion of Islam.
Right. And I think most of our politicians and our military still don't get it, or at least they're just waking up to it. Now, some people may disagree with me on this, but I think the people at the very top of our political realm right now, in the White House and the administration that surrounds them, I think they understand it full well. That's a debate for another day. But I think the vast majority of Americans and people in the West are just now beginning to wake up to what you just said, to the profundity of this thing. Don't you think, or do you think that they're are not awake yet, or do you think that they have fully grasped it? I think we're just in the cusp of people waking up and saying, wait a minute, these guys want to take over the world.
Well, you certainly have many people that are waking up to that. The problem is that the West and people like the left, they have swallowed hook, line, and sinker the insanity, the irrational philosophy of moral and cultural relativism. And that when that infects your brain, you literally will believe things that are impossible to believe. And so they may be awake, they may be walking around like they're awake, and they may see things right in front, but it still doesn't quite register because they are holding to basically the idea that all religions must be true. Now, look, even George W. Bush, he came out supposedly an evangelical Christian and said, listen, Islam is a great religion, that these terrorists are hijacking a great religion.
Yep.
Well, again, if you're a Christian and you have a so-called prophet that is teaching that all of the key core foundational doctrines that you believe are blasphemy, well, how can you call that a great religion? How can you call that anything other than really demonic?
Right.
But now, to be clear, I do believe that many are waking up to it. But here's another very dangerous issue, Carl, is that many are waking up to it, and they're Christians. The problem is, as they are waking up to it, they're filled with fear, and they're allowing hatred to consume them.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be clear. I hate evil. It's the opposite of God. I hate the evil that ISIS is doing. But again, it's scaring me when I see some of the rhetoric out there being preached by Christians that's not encouraging Christians to love Muslims, even if there are political and theological enemies, because the fact of the matter is one of the greatest end-time harvests that the Lord has in the earth is going to come out of the Islamic world. And if the church is not representing the Father and representing Jesus to these Muslims, we're only going to inflame them further. We're going to cause them to retreat and to defend their identity and to defend Islam even further. But it's when we love them and show them the love of God, despite their insistence on wanting to kill us and our friends and our family, that is when it infects their heart, and the love of God infects their heart, and that's when they change. And the only way we're going to really see change is if the love of God and that the revelation of God in Yeshua infects the heart of a Muslim. Suddenly we have Muslims that love Israel. How do you do that other than through a divine impartation of the Holy Spirit?
Right. Right. Well said. And as a matter of fact, we're not quite ready for our next break, Joel, but when we do, I'm going to get on the phone with you. I'm going to talk to you about something I heard you tell me and Jim Baker in the green room as we were preparing to go on the Jim Baker show. It was just an amazing thing. I'm going to talk to you about maybe sharing that with our audience here. But before we do, we're going to go to break here in about 2 or 3 minutes. Give us a quick synopsis of what the Muslims believe about the person of Jesus Christ. I want our audience to understand and to know this if they don't already know it.
Yeah, because this is so key. Muslims are expecting Jesus to return. They believe he's going to return, but they believe that he comes back not as the Jesus of the Bible, not as the Yeshua of the Bible, not as the returning Jewish king who is going to reestablish the throne of David and restore the kingdom to Israel over the nation. They believe he comes back as a Muslim.
Right.
They believe that he comes back and he tells all of the Christians of the world that you've had it wrong all along, and that he is actually going to wipe out Judaism, and he's going to kill the false Jewish Messiah. And so this is a profound perversion of the actual reality that we're waiting for.
Yeah, it is a perversion, and but what's so odd about it, and what I have a hard time helping people understand, is that if you speak to an Orthodox Jew, they claim that the biblical understanding of Jesus is a complete falsehood, that that and it's all apostasy, and they don't even want to speak the name, that it's all that it's anathema. But then you speak to a Muslim, and they'll talk to you about Jesus. But as you just said, once you understand the Jesus they're talking about, they're not talking about the Jesus of the Scriptures, the Jesus who died on Calvary's cross and rose again from the grave. So it can be extremely confusing to folks, can't it?
Yeah, exactly. How much time do we have right now?
We've got 1 minute before the break. So you want to wait till the other side of the break to go to where you want to go, or what?
Yeah, I want to say something with regard to the issue of Judaism and the concept of God, and Islam and the concept of God and our concept of God, because there's something really important that needs to be said there. But no, there's no question about it. See, Muslims use Jesus to try to convert Christians to Islam.
Yes.
And so they don't, they up front, they give us the Christianized, decaffeinated Islam light. They don't tell you the truth when they're trying to win you over. They give you a partial story. Islam really is the Hotel California. You can check in,
right,
but you can never leave. Once you get in, that's when you begin to discover the reality. But they're never going to share that on the front end.
Right, exactly.